Diligence, already harnessed, waited before the door, while an army of white pigeons, in their thick plumage, with rose-colored eyes, with a black spot in the center, walked up and down gravely among the legs of the 6 horses, seeking their livelihood and the manure there scattered. The driver, enveloped in his sheepskin, had a lighted pipe under the seat, and all the travelers, radiant, were rapidly packing some provisions for the rest of the journey. They were only waiting for Ball of Fat. Finally she appeared. She seemed a little troubled, ashamed, and she advanced timidly toward her companions, who all, with one motion, turned as if they had not seen her. The Count, with dignity, took the arm of his wife and removed her from this impure contact. The fat girl stopped, half stupefied. Then, plucking up courage, she approached the manufacturer's wife with, "Good morning, madame," humbly murmured. The lady made a slight bow of the head, which she accompanied with a look of outraged virtue. Everybody seemed busy, and kept themselves as far from her as if she had some infectious disease in her skirts. Then they hurried into the carriage, where she came last, alone, and where she took the place she had occupied during the first part of the journey. They seemed not to see her or know her, although Madame Loiseau, looking at her from afar, said to her husband in a half tone, "Happily I don't have to sit beside her." The heavy carriage began to move, and the remainder of the journey commenced. No one spoke at first. Ball of Fat dared not raise her eyes. She felt indignant toward all her neighbors, and at the same time humiliated at having yielded to the foul kisses of this Prussian, into whose arms they had hypocritically thrown her. Then the Countess, turning toward Mrs. Curie-Lamadon, broke the difficult silence. "I believe you know Madame de Trelles?" "Yes, she is one of my friends." "What a charming woman!" "Delightful, a very gentle nature, and well educated besides." "Then she is an artist to the tips of her fingers, sings beautifully, and draws to perfection." The manufacturer chatted with the Count, and in the midst of the rattling of the glass an occasional word escaped, such as coupon, premium, limit, expiration. Loiseau, who had pilfered the old pack of cards from the inn, greasy through 5 years of contact with tables badly cleaned, began a game of bezique with his wife. The good sisters took from their belt the long rosary which hung there, made together the sign of the cross, and suddenly began to move their lips in a lively murmur, as if they were going through the whole of the Oremus, and from time to time they kissed a medal, made the sign anew, then recommenced their muttering, which was rapid and continued. Cornadette sat motionless, thinking. At the end of 3 hours on the way, Loiseau put up the cards and said, "I am hungry." His wife drew out a package, from whence she brought a piece of cold veal. She cut it evenly, in thin pieces, and they both began to eat. "Suppose we do the same," said the Countess. They consented to it, and she undid the provisions prepared for the 2 couples. It was in one of those dishes whose lid is decorated with a china hare, to signify that a pâté of hare is inside, a succulent dish of pork, where white rivers of lard cross the brown flesh of the game, mixed with some other viands hashed fine. A beautiful square of Gruyere cheese, wrapped in a piece of newspaper, preserved the imprint "Divers Things" upon the unctuous plate. The 2 good sisters unrolled a big sausage, which smelled of garlic, and Cornadette plunged his 2 hands into the vast pockets of his overcoat at the same time, and drew out 4 hard eggs and a piece of bread. He removed the shells and threw them in the straw under his feet. Then he began to eat the eggs, letting fall on his vast beard some bits of clear yellow, which looked like stars caught there. Ball of Fat, in the haste and distraction of her rising, had not thought of anything, and she looked at them exasperated, suffocating with rage at all of them eating so placidly. A tumultuous anger swept over her at first, and she opened her mouth to cry out at them, to hurl at them a flood of injury which mounted to her lips. But she could not speak. Her exasperation strangled her. No one looked at her or thought of her. She felt herself drowned in the scorn of these honest scoundrels who had first sacrificed her and then rejected her like some improper or useless article. She thought of her great basket full of good things which they had greedily devoured, of her 2 chickens shining with jelly, of her pâtés, her pears, and the 4 bottles of Bordeaux. And her fury suddenly falling, as a cord drawn too tightly breaks, she felt ready to weep. She made terrible efforts to prevent it, making ugly faces, swallowing her sobs as children do, but the tears came and glistened in the corners of her eyes, and then 2 great drops, detaching themselves from the rest, rolled slowly down like little streams of water that filter through rock, and falling regularly, rebounded upon her breast. She sits erect, her eyes fixed, her face rigid and pale, hoping that no one will notice her. But the Countess perceives her, and tells her husband by a sign. He shrugs his shoulders as much as to say, "What would you have me do? It is not my fault." Mrs. Luceau indulged in a mute laugh of triumph and murmured, "She weeps for shame." The 2 good sisters began to pray again, after having wrapped in a paper the remainder of their sausage. Then Cornudet, who was digesting his eggs, extended his legs to the seat opposite, crossed them, folded his arms, smiled like a man who is watching a good farce, and began to whistle the Marseillaise. All faces grew dark. The popular song assuredly did not please his neighbors. They became nervous and agitated, having an appearance of wishing to howl like dogs when they hear a barbarous organ. He perceived this, but did not stop. Sometimes he would hum the words, "Sacred love of country, help, sustain the avenging arm, liberty, sweet liberty, ever fight with no alarm." They traveled fast, the snow being harder, but as far as Dieppe, during the long sad hours of the journey, across the jolts in the road, through the falling night, in the profound darkness of the carriage, he continued his vengeful, monotonous whistling with a ferocious obstinacy, constraining his neighbors to follow the song from one end to the other, and to recall the words that belonged to each measure. And Ball of Fat wept continually, and sometimes a sob, which she was not able to restrain, echoed between the 2 rows of people in the shadows. End of Ball of Fat,